Ready when you are.
Tin machines, diamond dogs, and life on Mars. Put on your red shoes and dance the Who's in this 9th edition of I'll Explain Later, the Doctor Who podcast that's strung out on heaven's high, hitting an all-time low. With me, John West.
Me, Jim Hall.
And me, Matt Needer. Tonight, following the murder of her father by the Daleks, the Doctor and Jamie cheer up Victoria by reanimating a notorious race of emotionless robotic killers. Symbolic logic meets frosty frolics in Tomb of the Cybermen.
Peter Davison tries to avoid a big bang with Lisa Goddard and finds the only solution is to do things doggy style. Thrills, pills and bellyaches in Terminus.
And David Tennant visits Bowie Base 1 in his golden years, but faces golden showers when Lindsay Duncan's levee breaks. The 10th Doctor and his new friend Gadget brave the waters of Mars. So, February rolls around. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this edition of the podcast. We're starting...
The month of romance.
The month of... the month of romance. And what better way to celebrate Valentine's Day with your loved one, significant other, than to kick back with, good 70 minutes or so of I'll Explain Later goodness.
All very romantically themed stories as well.
I was going to say, boy, do we have some classics to curl up and watch with your loved one.
We have some classics.
We're, sitting here, of course... oiled up and in my thong. I'm here to, so I'm going to kick off with the 1967 story, Second Doctor, Patrick Troughton, The Tomb of the Cybermen. And
should we explain why John's sounding a bit jittery at the moment?
Tell us when you... We'll go around the room and talk about when we first watched Tomb of the Cybermen. John, when did you watch Tomb of the Cybermen?
At 4 a.m. this morning.
Brilliant. And do you think this might have coloured your view of it in any way?
Well, we'll see. I had to cram a few episodes in to make this recording.
You've been sitting there with your bottle of Jolt Cola since 4 a.m.
that and some bells. But so Tim the Cybermen set on the planet Telos. Is that their home planet?
Oh no,
some debate here.
No,
okay.
definitely not.
We'll pick that up further down the line. But this is where they're buried, isn't it? This is...
it's never... Okay, so...
Their original homeworld is destroyed in their first story, 10th Planet, and this is where they bugger off to hibernate when their resources are running low, I think.
Okay.
So,
so...
They a big cardboard box with some holes punched in it. First
things first, it kicks off with an archaeological expedition, which the Doctor and Jamie and Victoria stumble upon... I want to start with this. Why does the Doctor help them find the Cybermen?
It is curious, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the only thing that really doesn't work, because everything else, I think I'll...
Yeah.
Well, no, because the story does provide an explanation of that, so we're jumping right ahead
very
here.
roughly, isn't it?
Well, and it's the worst explanation ever. So, essentially, there's an archaeological dig to unearth the Tomb of the Cybermen. Dr. Jamie and Victoria stumble across it. One of the people who's financing the gig as well, I guess, has ulterior motives. It's Klieg and Kaftan, who are, get this, rogue logicians.
Yes.
Who
foreign rogue logicians.
Teutonic rogue logicians who have an ulterior motive in unearthing the Cybermen. But the reason why they're able to get down into the tombs of the Cybermen and successfully defrost them is because they have a lot of help from the Doctor. And sort of fairly late in the story, the Doctor makes it quite clear that the reason why he has helped them is that was how he could find out for certain that they were mad and up to no good. Mm-hmm. So in order to find out that Klieg and Kaftan are up to no good, the Doctor basically enables their plan, gets them through to the Cybermen, and then says, yeah, now I know you're a wrong-un.
Absolutely.
Which is flawed, I would suggest.
It's very bad. I mean, obviously, they have to have some drama going along, but also, I suppose, the thing that struck me this time is there are a lot of opportunities in the script for the Doctor to look much cleverer than everybody else. But
yes.
In quite an annoying way, I say. But there's something else we should probably say about this story before we really start, which is it was lost for many, many years.
This was a holy grail for some time,
and
wasn't it?
During that time, it was generally regarded by fans as absolute classic, unimpeachable. This was the absolute holy grail. It turned up complete out of the blue
in Hong Kong.
In Hong Kong in 1992, I think.
Yeah, early 90s.
Which I wasn't. I was away from the show, shall we say, at that point. So I didn't get to see it till much later. Whenever I've watched it, I've been aware that it was then a disappointment. So I've actually always found it okay because the bar was low going in. And I think it's a perfectly serviceable... All right, it does have big issues, which we'll get on to. Yeah. But just as an adventure story, I think it's quite fun. It does have some iconic moments in it. But,
no, I mean, I agree. Basically, I agree. I thought it was pretty decent and I really enjoyed it, with the one caveat that I know there's the bit where he's talking to... What's he called? Logie. It's not Logie, is it?
Klieg? I don't know.
Klieg.
I
can never remember.
Logi's his first name, though.
Can never remember.
Logie Klieg.
No, he's called Eric.
Eric Klieg. I am Eric Klieg.
And it's just the key...
like a northern footballer.
The key wide-eyed villain being called Eric did somewhat tickle me. For some reason. But, there's a bit where Klieg obviously goes through, the doctor says to Klieg, oh yeah, and I can see it now, you'll be the leader of the world and a vision for everyone and people want to live their life the Klieg way or something like that. And Klieg looks very happy with this and the doctor says something like, well, now I know you're mad, I just wanted to make sure, which is cute and funny. And it's one of many zingers actually in the script, which is, got some great jokes in it. But so I did sort of clock the rationale, but at the end of the day, it is daft that he helps them. It is daft. It's sort of explained, but it's daft.
So can I just backtrack?
But if you accept that, if you just accept it, then actually all of the stuff that happens, the action, the stuff in the tomb, the sets, it's a pacey bit of action, and I think it's quite well shot.
Yeah.
Okay. I hate this.
Wow.
I think this is appalling. I think it's lazy. I think it's boring. I think it embodies the absolute worst of what I consider to be just lazy preconceptions and values on behalf of Doctor Who's production team and its audience. And I think it's unrepentantly racist. I absolutely despise this for all sorts of reasons. I think this is appalling.
And is this the first time you've watched this as well?
No, I watched it back... Well, actually, I've got quite a long history with this story because shortly after I got into the series for the first time, this was one of the first... I think this might have been the first or second Target book that I read, so that was how I came to the story first. And then before I saw it... I had my local library in Tunbridge in Kent had a copy of the audio recording of the soundtrack, so I sort of listened to the story probably when I was about 10 or 11, and then didn't actually watch it till I was at university and bought the DVD. And I sort of vaguely remember thinking, it's a bit dull, but I probably hadn't watched it for about 10 or 12 years until I watched it for this, and this just made me so angry. I think this is terrible.
Let's deal with the racism because it is there, and it's not just a bit of cultural. It's not culturally clumsy like in Evil of the Daleks,
which is the preceding story.
This is the thing. There's a few occasions where Doctor Who sort of. So for those who haven't seen it or those who aren't aware of what we're talking about, although if you've seen Tomb of the Cybermen, I think it stares you in the face. There is a character in this called Toberman, played by Roy Stewart. Roy Stewart. Who is a black character, something of a rarity in Doctor Who at this era, who is the grunting mute, put as servant but essentially slave of Kaftan, one of the two villains, and he is every inch the sort of mute.
He's the muscle.
Mute, cliched, stereotypical, deeply prejudicial use of a black character. It's appalling.
And he's very much got the same trajectory as... I actually can't remember the character's name. Camel is it in...
Kemmel the Turk, yes.
In that he starts
one story
earlier
as
the henchman and then comes good at the end.
Because I think reading around on this, a few people have clocked this over the years, and there are some. I mean, like racism in classic Doctor Who is something that I think a lot of the sort of hardcore fans would sort of probably prefer to put their fingers in their ears and sort of ignore this as a thing. There are two trains of thought on this that defend it, both of which I think are absolute horseshit, which we'll sort of deconstruct. One is that, he actually saves the day, he has a heroic death, this isn't racist, it's entirely positive, which is absolute nonsense.
But that's just noble, savage ghastliness,
I know, that's possibly even worse in some ways.
Yes.
I mean, actually, if he was a villain with some agency about himself, it would be...
Even
if Eric Klieg was black in this, it would be less racist than Toberman. But the other thing is like, and so much kind of actually, to be honest, there are not that many moments in classic Doctor Who that I would describe as overtly racist. I think it simply dodges the issue most of the time by having, presenting predominantly all-white characters. There's a kind of indulgence of this kind of thing, I think, that's sort of a bit, it was the 60s, they don't know what we know now. I completely dispute that, because this is, this story goes out 6 months before Martin Luther King is shot. We're in the crucible of the civil rights era. I think if you are putting a black character in a role like that in a drama at this time, you are making an active decision about that kind of thing. You are choosing what side of the argument you're coming down on, and even if you're doing it out of ignorance, I think it's unforgivable. And for me, it's by far from. I sound like John when we were discussing Kinder. This is by far from the only problem that I have with Tomb of the Cybermen, but I think it just so overshadows everything else. I think, even if this was made in the mid-50s, you might be able to at least indulge or skirt around. It's not like naming the dog in the Dam Busters or something, which is kind of like, a bit wince-inducing now, but you can sort of understand in the context. It's just, this is awful.
But even if they got rid of Toberman or made him a different kind of character, you would have issues with this in terms of pacing. And
I think it's unbelievably lazy, this. I think it's the point where, and I think possibly the reason why I feel so strongly about this now versus when I first saw it is because of all the Hartnell stories we've been watching for this, many of which I've sort of come at for the first time. It was a couple of things, really. I think this era, so season 5, this point in the Troughton era, I think through scarcity or through lack of availability, has a certain kind of, it's highly prized because we can't have it and therefore we want it.
And it was also known as the monster season. This is when a lot of the classic monsters were seen as.
Well, that's the thing, though. I see that as a bad thing, because I think this is the season, and I think the Troughton era as a whole. His performance is great. His performance is really good, and I think probably sets the trend for all the Doctors that come subsequently. Hartnell's sort of a little bit more of an aberration in that regard. But this is the point where Doctor Who establishes a formula and gets incredibly lazy about what it's doing. This is one of an entire string of stories that are essentially an environment under siege by one of a very small rotating number of monsters. Functionally identical stories. And it's almost like the Hartnell era is wildly tonally inconsistent and sort of massively all over the place, but ambitious in its sense that we're going to try something new every week. We're going to do, and not just in terms of setting or genre, but in terms of like tone. We'll do comedy, we'll do tragedy, we'll do, personal kind of, little bit of reflection on society, all this kind of stuff. Whereas this is where the Troughton era is basically where they say, right, what Doctor Who is he goes to a place and he is bothered by some monsters, and then in episode 4 they find a way to sort it out.
You can see budget-wise why that would be a good mode of production, because you just have to essentially build one or two big sets and you can keep using the same monster outfits.
But I think it's as lazy as the Sayward era in the 80s.
I'm not denying that. Well, we'll come on to Sayward in very soon.
Whenever we next come to Sayward. But it's that kind of sense of like, right, okay, this is what Doctor Who is as Doctor Who does now, is basically what they're saying. And
I mean, I'd agree with a lot of what you say there. I mean, the big difference between this and other stories in this season, even though they're all pretty much all based under siege, Enemy of the World would be the exception. They're 6-parters and they really, really drag.
Yeah.
Whereas
I think this drags
4 parts. I mean, I've got to say, rather than getting up at 4 a.m. to watch this, I did watch it over 4 nights. Although, yeah, it did seem to take longer than I remembered to get from point to point. A few things I'd like to ask. This is the first time we're seeing Troughton while we're doing this podcast. When we did Evil of the Daleks, it was a reconstruction. You did mention you thought his performance was good. John, how did you find Troughton? Is this...
I thought the performance was absolutely stunning. I think he's terrific, and not just that, but the interaction with, particularly the relationship, the evident chemistry with Fraser Hines as Jamie. It just absolutely sizzles. The jokes that they have between each other when when Victoria, obviously she's come from the Victorian era, and she
clues in the name.
Yes, actually,
and they immediately get to get her dressing in a contemporary.
Yeah, and she's wearing sort of a knee-length skirt and saying is a bit short. And
the excuse being, let's get some more practical clothes.
Yeah, exactly. And then quick as a flash, the Doctor says, "Oh, I don't think so. Look at Jamie's." And it's just there's all those little bits and pieces, and.
Well, Hines and Troughton, I think, sort of look, and you don't actually get this too often anywhere in Doctor Who, but they sort of remind me a bit of Tennant and Catherine Tate, in that it's one of the few times, and Tom Baker and Liz Sladen, actually. It's one of the few occasions where you totally buy into the fact that these are two people who just enjoy hanging out together.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's, that sort of relationship, I mean, there's been a lot of sniggering about it, but that relationship's played between two men as well. It's sort of the only time in any Doctor Who, really, where that kind of relationship's kind of portrayed well. They're just a couple of mates.
I think the other thing that maybe, because actually sitting here, I quite enjoyed watching it with the obvious sort of elephant in the room of the racism, which does loom large. But I did quite enjoy it. I thought that it opened very strongly. I thought, there are any number of Doctor Who serials that involve some shots in a quarry, but I thought it was really well shot. There was some good low-down stuff, good...
Some of it's beautifully made.
I mean, the director, what was his name?
Maurice Barry.
Yeah, Maurice Barry. I think there's some really good shots there.
Yeah.
There are really good close-ups as well, even in the interior sets. The sets themselves are luscious. I thought... But
especially that wide shot of the tombs stacked up on each other.
Yeah.
I mean that I would say
that's iconic, isn't it?
Well, I mean, and that's the thing. It's probably that one shot, I would say, that this serial's kind of positive reputation kind of rests on. Is there are so many things in that shot that aren't taking anything for granted as well. The defrosting, the fact that the Cybermen are sort of crouching in their cells is somehow far more sinister than if they were just standing there like robots.
They have to sort of stretch out and put their hands through this. Cling
and then
film
the bit when they unveil
the
the cyber controller and he's sort of sitting there just as if he's deep in thought. It's kind of like Rodan's the thinker, he's there.
You've got your hands on your thighs. He's holding them to his head like he's recovering from a bad night.
I know, but
something.
there's something about that. It's about we're not just going to do, they're robots, so they'll stand there sort of stiffen to attention until they are somehow sort of mobilised. It's like that's so creepy. Very effective.
Yeah, but there are a lot of things in the production and the pacing and the direction and the set design, production design that I thought were great. I think what maybe, because actually when I was listening to the criticisms that you're making, Matt, I'm thinking actually, I actually agree with most of that, but I still kind of quite enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that really makes this stand out is the quality of the dialogue, the jokes, and of course that key scene in episode 3 where he has the conversation with Victoria, the Doctor, about the death of her father.
Now that's wonderful.
And that is a beautiful piece of writing, and it ends with that sort of that bit about nobody in the universe can do what we're doing, and basically that every life is special, and that the way to get over when you mourn people, that eventually their memories fade and you can just remember the good things. And there's so much going on in that scene, and it's really well acted. So I think in a way, whatever misgivings one might have, it's almost worth it to have just that scene. And
nicely with that scene, you don't get, because that was quoted for a while. I remember as a kid growing up reading Doctor Who Monthly. This is a big, this tells us a lot about the Doctor's background. It doesn't really, does it? It just, presumably, they just thought it'd be a nice scene to have, and presumably the Doctor has a family, but they just kind of, they don't really, it wasn't there to be some big clue as to...
and in some ways, that's kind of, Troughton doesn't get many moments like that, actually, whereas, we've sort of talked about the things that are surprising about the characterisation of the Hartnell Doctor, in that, he's prepared to do things that later Doctors aren't. He's earthy, falls in love, obviously he visibly has a family, he has a value set that aren't just like he's alien but superior, but actually you might disagree with or have some sort of beef with. And actually I kind of wish they'd done that more with the Troughton Doctor, just that idea of not humanising as in just making him like anyone else, but actually just rounding out those bits so he's less like an archetype. And actually when he talks about, he is sort of lightly identifying with Victoria's loss in that scene, and it's very effective.
Well, just to pick up on that, I think one of the problems of the sort of 80s John Nathan Turner and the Moffat eras is this idea of the Doctor as an enigma being itself an interesting thing.
Yes.
Whereas,
whereas actually it's quite often an excuse not to develop the character.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, if you look at the Hartnell and certainly this this scene in Tomb of the Cybermen and the RTD era, it's more he is an enigmatic, but he's not sort of he still reveals things about himself coincidentally and in the way that you would in conversation. It makes the dialogue much more natural. On the Cybermen themselves, I do have one basic thing to say, which is
it the Cyber Controller's head?
No. Although I did love the sort of veiny brain stuff in the top of the sort of helmet. Aren't the Cybermen basically just a bit shit? I mean, the trouble, you were talking about the iconic scene where they're coming out of they seem to be defeated by a flap opening into their thing. They can't open it. They managed to build.
You mean to their tombs rather than on their outfits?
So they've managed to put themselves into a hibernation where there's no way for them to open it from the inside, which is where they all are.
Where only the cleverest people could possibly...
Well, that's the idea, isn't it? They sort of set themselves as a trap so that then it'll only be really clever people will get them out and then they'll become superior Cybermen, which is just nonsense. You would never do that.
And you were discussing the iconic scene. It is a beautiful piece of production design of the tomb itself. But actually, although it's a bit creepy and they're crouching and then they sort of stretch out, they're almost defeated by a layer of cellophane.
Bit of clean film across the front.
And just as an idea for a monster, they're very much, by this point, cut-price Daleks. We'll discuss 10th Planet when we eventually get round to that, their first story, which I think is very, very different, the presentation of them there.
Was probably the best Cyberman story, I think.
It's pretty much the only good one, I'm going to maybe say. But even by their second appearance in the moon base, they've made them much more mechanical here. You can barely understand their dialogue a lot of the time in this.
I think the design and the voices here. Now I'm going to defend it against you.
No, the voices. I literally could not understand what the cyber leader was.
But I sort of like that. I mean, you have to really strain at it, but it's sort of. I think they're at least creepy here. They're really creepy. Whereas obviously in the 80s, where they become sort of gung-ho, where they become American and really camp.
Sarcastic.
Yes. And sarcastic and catty.
The bits I could understand of the cyber... Is it the cyber controller or cyber...
The cyber controller,
controller. The bits I could understand of the cyber controller...
by Michael Kilgareth.
Really strange voice. It's like a sort of Southern Baptist preacher, but with a very English accent.
Well,
so
it's Ned
we
from
will
South Park,
survive. We will live... it's very strange.
Last time when we reviewed Evil of the Daleks, I don't think any of us were impressed with Deborah Watling as Victoria. Did you feel she had a little bit more to do here? Rather than,
she has something to do.
Well, she was a peril monkey in Evil of the Daleks. Here she's a little more proactive. She's holding the fort when Kaftan's trying to sort of get her plans together.
But there's a few things here that she... I think in terms of the writing, they have absolutely no idea what to do with her. That they are... They kind of flip between giving her sort of ass-kicking feminist agency, kind of almost in terms of like her sort of being determined, her putting down... I mean, let's talk about the two American guys shortly, because they're quite something. But, those sorts
they sure are.
Yeah, she sort of calls them out for being sort of sexist and patronising. But then, yes, at other times, she screams she doesn't want to go into the tomb or anything. I think they haven't got a handle on her as a read. I don't think Deborah Wattling's a good enough actress to paper over that. But also, and this is not her fault, not the writer's fault, I think that the chemistry between Patrick Troughton and Fraser Hines is so tight. She, and sort of like Zoe to follow, she inevitably is going to feel like the third wheel in that relationship. It's not like the first TARDIS crew where you almost sort of feel like it's a partnership of equals among people who kind of sort of make up for each other's deficiencies. It's like it's two best mates and then someone else who they've taken along out of charity, essentially.
Although without talking too much about Zoe so far, my memory of her is that they actually do keep fairly consistent with the idea she's a girl from the future who views things a bit differently. Victoria here...
I think she's a more successful character than Victoria.
Victoria
certainly.
Here, there's nothing that much to suggest that she's someone coming to the adventure with a different take on things. She's just... she might as well have been from the 20th century.
Well, no, I mean, she kind of... Yeah, well, that's exactly it. I mean, it's like... not only is her mind going to be blown by the far future and the other planets, it's presumably going to be blown by the sort of 100 or so years that puts her away from the audience, really, as well. It's kind of...
So, the rest of the expedition, I do think Klieg... I can't remember the actor's name, actually, sorry, but I think he's good. I like
quite
him.
like
I think he's got
The Cypriot fella.
Yeah, he is kind of a known from Hammer films and things. I've seen him in other stuff. But I think his performance is good, and he obviously he's got the level right on. The risibility.
I mean, it's that
everything.
sort of... I mean, everyone else, I think...
George Pastel.
Yes.
There you go. I think pretty much everyone else in the guest cast kind of overacts pretty woefully.
Well, let's go through that. I think Kaftan is actually the producer's wife, Shirley Cooklin. Yeah.
Oh, really?
She's okay, but again, I think she's like, the Dragon Lady type of evil.
Yeah.
It's a pity. It's pretty much a by numbers vamp.
Yeah. Cyril Shaps, who's the kind of panicky chap towards the beginning.
He's good. I made a note of him.
I think he's done a very good job.
Yeah, his scaredy cat thing is terrific.
But is it going through
Although
it?
his like just before he dies, he has a moment of real bravery, which I quite liked.
Because this is
Oddly,
odd.
I clocked it as the sort of performance John would enjoy.
I did.
Weirdly, I sort of thought this is going to play well in some quarters.
Because oddly, as we were recording this over Christmas, BBC had a production of Agatha Christie's 10 Little Indians, as it's now called.
No, and then they were none, I believe is what it's...
I'm getting confused. Was it called that? No.
That was what the BBC one was called.
That's what
and then there were
because
none.
then there's a 70s film version with Oliver Reed and various Bond villains. So that would be called 10 Little Indians. But I watched both of those, and this seemed very much like that might have been... The obvious starting point for this would be like Universal Mummy movies or something. But that felt like they got this sort of fairly disparate group of individuals together who are complying to those stereotypes of the shifty guy and the panicky guy and the sort of gung-ho chaps as well.
But if the idea is that there's going to be a traitor in the midst...
Well, not so much the traitor thing, but just getting them together and they're going to get knocked off in a sequence.
Oh, I see.
Well, we're going to discuss Waters of Mars in a bit. And the fact that they arrive on a sort of rocky planet and they encounter an expedition and there's a sort of base-like scenario and things go wrong and one of them sort of picked off piece by piece. I know we say this literally every episode, but there's nothing new under the sun. I mean,
No.
It's funny.
But I mean,
how
I think
these
this
things
is the
echo
era, though, where that sort of base under siege kind of...
once they realise they can do it, they'll keep doing it. And
they'll
it does
keep
get
churning it
tedious
out.
very quickly. Yes, the Americans. So this is Clive Merrison, who's gone on to be quite well known as one of them.
You'll have to remind me
Jim
where...
Moore. He's the guy who is Jim, who turns up a little bit later and gets shot by Klieg at the very beginning of the 4th episode.
Oh, yeah.
And the other is George... Is it Robacek or something?
I assume that one of them did voices for Thunderbirds or something like that. They sound that
He
kind
sounds
of...
so much like that, doesn't he, George Robacek? But no, he doesn't. He crops up as many Doctor Who actors does in Star Wars and in The Spy Who Loved Me very briefly as well. But I quite like it. I mean, it's terrible, but it's quite entertaining.
It might just be
through.
the sort of the straining to get the accents to work plus the appalling dialogue. I mean, what's the point of that? It just sounds like a gag that no one had really thought through or forgotten to take out the script. But
there's an awful lot of that'll do, isn't there? Really?
When Victoria says, like, who'd be a woman to one of their sexist put downs, and he goes, I don't know, how would you know, honey? It's like, which sort of sounds like a joke, but isn't. And it's not funny and it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, but those guys are pretty much there so they can keep people updated that the rocket's not working yet.
Yeah, they just sort of come in and out and say, like, yep, no, still working on it.
Yeah. You could have done that much more elegantly, and from the producer's point of view, without budget, by just having someone radio in and say, yeah, the rocket's not ready yet, or just have had the tomb doors closed behind them so they couldn't get out, or something. You didn't need a character to pop in every now and again and say, yeah, the rocket's not ready yet.
Yeah, still working on it.
So this is only the 3rd appearance by the Cybermen. I'm getting the sense, are we all kind of questioning whether they should have become as big a monster as they
I've
did?
never got... I think very
They're a bit
few...
seriously
shit. I think
was.
they're a bit shit. Apart from the design.
Yeah, these always looked good in photos when I was growing up. But then when you actually watch them, I mean, I think this is a common thing. I think once Terry Nation decided he was going to take the Daleks away, the decision was made, the Cybermen, we'll just promote them.
People quite like them.
We've got them. We've got the outfits already. So they were kind of promoted without any... It wasn't like... I don't know if the public particularly took to them.
But that's
If it
the
was just
thing. I
decided-
think we're always told that they're the other classic monster. And that's sort of almost like, I remember in season 2 of the new series when they sort of announced, the Cybermen are going to come back next year. And there's that sort of initial thing of like, yeah, because I think possibly in terms of public memory, they might be the only other monster that sort of moved the dial.
in memory, but the original reason they appeared
anyone
so
actually like
frequently
them?
was just...
It's just through sheer osmosis, isn't it, that they become a classic Doctor Who monster? It's like they're just grindingly there.
No. I think it's like you say. We're just told they are, so they are. I wanted to just say something about the music, because I was quite amused when I was looking at
I love the music.
I was quite amused when I was looking at the sort of Wikipedia and IMDb thing that, the composer was one stock music.
Yeah.
And he seems to have had quite a great run, actually.
He teamed up with Aiken and Waterman later, didn't he?
Yeah. Actually, I wondered who really had composed the key sort of refrain.
That is called Space Adventure, I think, but it was pretty much adopted as the Cybermen's theme.
It's terrific.
All of them is really just different composers. I mean, I've got it on. I think I've got the album somewhere that it's on, but it's I mean, it's a whole bunch of weird. I to be honest, this era I kind of prefer the stock music to all the sort of specially composed stuff, just because they do pick out some really kind of wacky stuff.
Yeah, and sometimes when you get sort of a 5-second burst of something, it's really bizar.
Yeah,
I really like that. It's pretty sinister.
But also, I mean, that's the whole thing that actually 60s Doctor Who does really well, is that divide between music and sound design is wafer thin. There's the stuff that probably was designed as special effects that gets used as music cues and vice versa.
Yeah, because a lot of the time you've just got a background noise for the planet anyway to suggest its atmosphere, but then occasionally that might double up as
But actually, I mean, it's
well.
kind of looking forward a bit, but that's sort of a lot of the kind of Doctor Who kind of soundtrack releases that came out. There are tunes that, like, there's one on the Crotons soundtrack release, which I find it very weird that got a vinyl release a couple of years ago, but there you go. But there's a track on there called Zoe's Theme, which is really out there and virtually sound effects. It's virtually atonal, but also just incredibly beautiful sort of prototype ambient music. Obviously, you've got the stock music on here. And then things like, in the Pertwee era, the soundscape for Metebelis 3 is incredibly musically realised as well. I realise we've sort of gone off on a tangent here, but it's that kind of that they haven't quite got it all set out. You now obviously know that Murray Gold's providing the music bit and the sound effects people are providing the sound effects bit, and that's everyone has their part. But it's sort of it's creating that sort of swirl of soundscape where you're not sure if it's atmosphere or music.
And also, I mean, going forward a bit, but even though I think Murray Gold's done some very good things, just the fact that you've got the same composer working for so long means that there's something very homogenised about the show's background atmosphere. And I think that also happened during the past with the Radiophonics workshop. And
well, that's the thing. But even the stock music, so presumably you'll have as many contributors as there are musical themes in here. But it's like those, George Romero was always preferred to use stock music to original scores. And so, like Dawn of the Dead, for example, which is, I think an amazing soundtrack, but it's a real hodgepodge of weird electronics and the sort of brass band stuff. It's all about kind of context, really.
Yeah.
But no, the music's great here.
Sorry, I didn't mean the Radiophonics workshop. I meant Dudley Simpson.
To me, it seems that there are actually quite a few things in the production to praise, and yet at the same time, I can sort of see, Matt, where you're coming from in terms of it being quite formulaic or becoming quite formulaic, and the racism thing does sort of really weigh on this very heavily. But I still think it's very interesting, and I've already mentioned Waters of Mars, and we're going to be discussing it in this episode. I think it's interesting that we're discussing this in that context, because when you've got the opening rocks and the bass thing, and then the Doctor's arrogance on top of it, when he's sort of wanting to show off about the maths, and then it's actually the maths that allows the villain to get away.
Symbolic logic.
Yeah, that sort of that theme of
me neither.
That theme of oh, by the way, the whole League of Logicians. I thought there was the League of Magicians. I was expecting him to sort of whip out a top hat and a cane.
Is logician a word, or is it something that was invented for Tomb of the Cybermen?
I've no idea.
Probably. I'm not sure there's someone whose occupation is
the Logician Circle. Yeah. Not to mention a rogue logician.
Yes, he's using his powers for evil.
Yeah. Logician gone rogue.
I don't know. I mean, I think that's the thing. The thing that irritates me most about this is simply that, and it's almost, obviously I've got to critique the story, not the perception, but there is still, even though since this turned up, over 20 years ago, and people have watched it, this sense that it doesn't live up to the hype nevertheless still exists. I think there are people who will use the perceived qualities of this as a stick to beat the Hartnell era or some of the more experimental, 80s episodes, or even, I think they're a mixed bag, but some of the Moffat episodes or something that at least try and do something a bit different. Mm-hmm. Whereas this, its reputation seems to rest on the fact that it plays it so robustly safe. Like you got irritated almost about the idea of Ghostlight more than you did the actual story. For me, it's exactly the same with this. It's like, I think it's lazy. I think it's unambitious. It has moments of technical flair, but ultimately, I'm not buying it.
The other unfortunate thing I can remember about the Tomb of the Cybermen was when one of the Cybermen had to be killed. For the effect, visual effects piped up this unfortunate Cyberman with buckets off the set, of course, of goo, and he writhed very realistically about, and all this goo came out as well. I thought it was very good, but I had my knuckles rapped very severely afterwards because they said it was much too explicit, much too explicit.
So, Terminus from 1983, in which the TARDIS hits a spot of bother, mm-hmm. and the Fifth Doctor, Tegan, Nyssa, and their suspicious new friend Turlo, who we'll talk about in a bit, wind up on an abandoned spaceship at the same time as a pair of glamorous space pirates are attacking, led by Lisa Goddard.
They're quite disco, aren't they?
They spend, I don't want to preempt a review, but they spend an episode not doing very much other than getting split up, and then discover that it's actually carrying victims of a sort of futuristic space version of the plague called Lazar's disease off to a quarantine ship.
It's leprosy, isn't it?
Yeah. They're carried off to a quarantine ship, which again is an abandoned ship from an earlier age, I think, owned by the faceless Terminus company. There for the 4 episodes, very little's actually happening. There's not much in terms of incident. It's a lot of exposition.
You have preempted your review.
However, hold on to your hats, because at the end of episode 3, we find out that the Terminus ship caused the universe to be created.
Yeah.
In a not terribly well explained piece. But it may
basically
also...
the cam belt fell off the engine.
It went back in time, dumped its exploding fuel, kicked off the Big Bang, and now may actually end the universe as well. And other than that, we do meet they're called the Vanier, who are kind of like the staff who are herding these...
Kind of like the janitors, basically.
Pretty much. And we find out over the time that they're not actually the Terminus company themselves. They're slave labour who are only really doing their job because they're being supplied with a kind of vaccination drug or energy source, which is some sort of green water. So I'm going to launch in and say that does sound like not much is happening. And I do think it is actually very low on incident. I've got more to say about it, but what were your guys' first impressions of this?
I thought it was shit.
Okay. Did you watch this at 6 this morning, or...?
No.
That's on your epic voyage of Doctor Who,
actually,
did you?
Yes, I did. Yeah. But I did think it was
the
shit.
weekend starts here.
Everything about this... and I'm not sort of, like, angry with it for being pretentious or overblown like I was with Kinder and perhaps with Ghostlight as well. It's a standard bit of space drama. It's the kind of thing you'd expect. They get on a ship. It seems to be deserted. It's a bit spooky. Something happens. So that's a perfectly reasonable setup. It's a filler serial. Fine. I've no problem with that particularly. You can do it well. You can do it pacily. You can do it dramatically, interestingly. What I think kills this is the bizarre relationship setup that seems to be the TARDIS crew at this point. Nyssa doesn't have a character.
Oh yes, this is her last story, so she's up front in this. She's really taking part in the action rather than being fainting or something.
The director is a woman, Mary Ridge, and yet this is the most outrageously sexist sort of stylings. I mean, Nyssa is more or less... she looks like she's ready for a wet T-shirt competition.
She strips down to her underwear and...
Yeah, she loses her skirt at one point.
And very conspicuously isn't wearing a bra as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's just... I'm no prude, but it's a bit
leering.
It is a bit leering, and it was a bit weird. But, so Nyssa doesn't have a character apart from she likes...
Or a bra.
Or a skirt.
But she's great with test tubes.
She can synthesize an enzyme.
And how?
Janet Fielding as Tegan, I think, puts in a shift. I think she's pretty good. but I still don't think she's given a lot to play with. Certainly in this, as Jim sort of alluded to, there's a whole episode where Turlough and Tegan are trapped under
the floorboard.
Under a floorboard.
Well, can I go one further than that? It's not just that there's a whole episode where they're trapped under a floorboard. It's that Tegan and Turlough spend the entire story just trying to find the Doctor, and they do right at the end, and he says...
Only after they've given up, though.
Only after they've given up.
For a whole episode.
And he says, I thought I told you not to leave the TARDIS. It's like, it's not even that they're not given very much to do in this. Right. They are given nothing to do other than try and catch up with him after he walks out right in the beginning.
And so, I got through Nyssa and Tegan, and then finally get to Turlough. Now, I realised that I have only seen Turlough, I think, in... Five Doctors. By which point, he's sort of just a little bit priggish, but there isn't this sense of menace that there is with the Black Guardian.
Yeah, we should explain that. This is his second story, and his introduction was the Black Guardian, who's an old enemy of the Doctor's, and is pretty much the force of darkness in the universe.
And has 3/4 of a dead cockerel on his head.
Has enlisted Turlough as his agent, and so the three stories when he's basically... Turlough's charged with killing the Doctor or sabotaging the TARDIS or whatever, which is what kicks off incidents here. But it's just lots and lots of, this is your last chance, boy.
Yeah.
Yes, the Black Guardian sort of appears at various points and sort of wags his finger a bit and says, have you done it yet? And he goes, no.
Because this is Sayward, right? This is a Sayward script.
No,
he's not. Yeah. The script is written by, who is it?
Steve Gallagher.
Right, yes, Stephen Gallagher, who went on to do Bugs.
Well, no, but this is the thing, actually. Sorry, just to put a slight interjection into your point here, but I think we're going to come back to the same point.
Yeah.
Stephen Gallagher is, I think, probably one of the few... I mean, yes, he heavily involved in Bugs, which no one's looking back on as a high point of British drama.
No?
No, funnily enough. But he is...
He's had a successful career.
He has had a successful career, and is actually one of the few classic series writers who is still... working and getting TV work today.
In the States as well.
Yeah. And he's a decent writer, essentially. And I sort of think, my sort of big problem with this is that I think the actual setup, the story, in terms of what he brings to the table, is very, very good. I think it's the kind of story that probably the new series would do. It feels like a very new series setup. You've got a bit of corporate politics.
It's very cynical.
Bit of disease,
big
bit of horror.
Yeah.
Interesting. For want of a better phrase, timey-wimey twist with the Big Bang setup. It feels like a very modern and potentially quite interesting story. Any sense of drama or menace or interest is methodically shredded out of it by both the execution and what I suspect. It's like, I don't want us to get into a loop necessarily of just always blaming everything that goes wrong in 80s Doctor Who on Eric Sayward. But,
however,
that's the thing.
It's difficult not to, yeah.
Yeah, and John, I think we're all developing quite a fine ear now for picking up Saywardese in terms of the style of dialogue.
That's very much where I was going. Yeah.
The lack of contractive apostrophes is a bit of a giveaway.
And also, you get the sense of a dead hand insisting on certain character interaction ideas that don't actually make sense. So that, it's very clear, for example, that he wants the Sixth Doctor to be Grump, who then has a redemptive arc. He wants this group of people to sort of not really get on with each other and then find their way, but it's not done with any grace or style, and it weighs so heavily on...
No subtlety at all.
And because their interactions are so clunky because of that setup, it doesn't actually advance the drama, the plot, the action.
And all these little things that should be kind of nuances in the characters, because it's interesting. Yeah, you rightly kicked off with the TARDIS crew. Again, I don't think, as we've sort of said with the Sayward's arc for the Sixth Doctor, there's nothing inherently wrong with the idea of the Turlough arc, particularly if it was an arc that was only meant to play out for 3 stories, of what they try and do. And actually it is trying to do something a bit new with the character, but it's just done with so little subtlety and so little flair. I mean, and likewise Tegan as well, you know, who should be a slightly sort of spiky character and is just a harridan.
Yeah, and I still think that Janet Fielding is pretty good at, but yeah, there's not much to play with. I did think, for example, the scene in the beginning of episode 1 where Turlough is trying to cynically gain Tegan's trust.
Can I just backtrack there? It starts with this character, a lot of the audience, well, they may have seen the previous weeks, but it's a new character.
Yeah.
And just a voice from nowhere telling him to take a portal out of the TARDIS. It's just, there's not a lot of... Again, a good script editor would have made it clear what's happening to new viewers. Where it's just
it's funny you say that.
It's
funny. It's funny you say that because I do a little bit. I know it doesn't sound like it to our listener will be shocked to hear this. I do tend to do a bit of research, but I try to do the research after I've watched it because I just want to watch
first
it.
Impression.
I was utterly bemused by that. I had no idea what was going on. But yeah, so this disembodied voice tells him, start buggering about with the roundels and switching circuits and things. And then there's a scene where Tegan basically catches him doing some sabotage, and he tries to sort of get her round his little finger and win her trust by making her believe that she was being a bit potty. And basically, it just reminded me of the sort of high camp villainy of nasty Nick Bateman in the first series of Big Brother, which is itself a bit of a throwback sort of reference. But it was just so, I don't know, there was something so stupidly clunky about it, and
that's the thing. I really can't point to anything in this story that I would actively, certainly in the story on the concept level, anything that I would point to and say this is a bad idea. And I've read, I did a little bit of reading around on this, and what was the intention of it as well. And there's a lot of ideas bubbling around. This idea of the Garm as apparently, and this is a good example. The Garm, for example, who's the quote unquote monster in this, is meant to be this sort of figure from Norse mythology, isn't it? He's this old dog-headed creature at the end who exists at the end of the universe or something like that.
The cyclical thing of the universe being created and destroyed at the same instance.
None of which comes across on screen. What it is just like a fat, paunchy dog wandering around.
But it's utterly bewildering what that dog thing is and what it's there for.
It's not explained. And I know Steve Gallagher maybe is... I'm going to give him the time of day and say he's not just trying to sort of blame someone else, but the documentary on the DVD of this, Gallagher had already written Warrior's Gate a few years earlier and was aware of Doctor Who's limitations as TV.
I've only read the novel of Warrior's Gate, actually. I've not actually seen the episode, but I read the novel that he did under the pseudonym of John Lydekker, which I quite like as a pseudonym. But that's another big ideas story.
Well, I'm going to compare the two a little bit as we go on, but... he knew the limitations, but I think he was maybe expected to have a monster, so he goes out of his way to say, this is kept in the shadows, it's a dog-like creature, but we only really ever see its eyes. And then, lo and behold, Doctor Who does it with no subtlety, and it ends up looking like sort of a mascot for a football team. Or maybe something that an 80s breakfast cereal would have in its advertising campaign. But yeah, it's not really explained what it does. I think it's meant to carry the people off and ostensibly cure them, but not really. It's the beck and call of people, but yeah, there's this control box it wants destroying, but it's not really set up that bit beforehand. It's suddenly we hear that it has a control box.
I had no idea he was enslaved until he mentions that.
Yeah, he is.
But all of that is potentially nice ideas. That's the thing, this sort of enslaved yet sort of mythical figure who carries, there's so much that could be good there.
The other thing Steve Gallagher's keen to say is he'd gone out of his way, as with Warrior's Gate. I think he was very inspired by the first Alien film, when the crew of Nostromo are very much just schlubs rubbing along together who are only there for the money and don't have any love for the job. He'd gone out of his way.
That's a very Sayward thing as well.
Yeah, but Steve Gallagher did it somewhat better.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And he'd gone out of his way in this to make the Vanniers schlubs, and had very much written, I think the scene when they realise the drug they've been given is a knockoff copy. He said, what, do they think we're thick or something? And what we get here under Sayward is, they must think us fools. Yeah. And all of that kind of stuff's taken out of it. Yeah, I think there's just a real conflict between Steve Gallagher's original script, which I've not read. I'm doing him a service of taking him on trust that he did something better. and Sayward, what Sayward did with it, and a production team who didn't really know what they were doing. I think you need...
Well, it's lit up like a Christmas tree, this, isn't it? I mean, it's like this idea of some sort of dark, lurking...
Beyond that, though, it's not just the lighting.
So boring to look at.
I'm imagining you must read the script and realise it's meant to be a medieval worldview, of the plague, the Black Death, transported to space, and it needs something rather better for the sets, something gothic and cathedral-like. And they've got just like a spaceship knocked together in a studio.
Yeah, they've got a spaceship knocked together in a studio and some non-equity registered actors to mill about in the background saying nothing.
Well, there's precisely one interesting design idea in this, which is the sort of skull logo.
The sort of Day of the Dead Mexicana
and actually,
when
that appears in the TARDIS,
it promises something.
And you think, oh, okay, this is something. It's like
absolutely the one standout design element.
It's the single idea that they've had that seems to make it onto screen.
I do like the armour of the Vanir as well, but again, the problem with that, it looks good, but it clanks all the time.
I think the design may have been good for that armour, but the execution is terrible.
Well, also coupled to, I mean, the Vanir stuff, potentially... Well, again, like everything in this, potentially an interesting idea, but ultimately is a bunch of bickering old men.
Yeah, they're squabbling and they look like a sort of Black Sabbath tribute band.
Yeah, they just sort of clank around. They're indistinguishable from each other.
There's a very low-powered struggle for control between a couple of them.
Yeah.
That's fucking
a storyline that precisely failed to engage me at all.
But this is it. I mean, but yeah, going back to what we were saying about Tegan and Turlough just shuffling around doing nothing and Sayward's script editing, you get the sense he must have read this script and thought, right, the two guest characters are these space pirates, and one's this feisty woman who's very proactive, and the other's a panicky young man who runs away at the first sign of trouble. What am I going to do with Tegan and Turlough? And it's not like the space pirates bring anything in themselves. They don't call up the space pirates to save them at the end. So you just think, why didn't you ditch them and have Tegan and Turlough?
This is exactly what we said about Kinder as well. The mistake they always make is to bring in, typically, and as we said, Davison plays incredibly well against middle-aged women, essentially. I think... Sorry,
he's well known for it.
That sounded awful. But you know what I mean? So like they do with Nerys Hughes in Kinder. And actually, I think the one performance I actually quite like in this, and I don't think she's, doesn't seem to be widely acclaimed for this, but I actually quite like Liza Goddard in this as Kari. Partly just because she's got a good read on the material, and I think her chemistry with Davison is all right. And so actually those two sort of wandering around, they basically always seem to put Davison's Doctor with a female character who is conspicuously a bit better than any of the regulars.
Oh no! I mean, I think that would have worked with Janet Fielding. I mean, I just think it's extraordinary that they stick to those two companions doing nothing. I
mean, that literally they don't do anything.
Yeah, and
other
they
than
sit
get
around
stuck and
pretty
try and
much
find
having
him.
defeated themselves for a long time. The other thing is, I imagine it would have been Gallagher wouldn't have known anything about the Black Guardian plot, so it would have been Sayward who would have been sitting there thinking, right, so we've got this story about these kind of medieval plague victims, and I've got to get this character in who's like the devil or the personification of death. I just don't know how I'm going to get him into this script.
How can I possibly?
Oh, I know. I'll put him on the TARDIS scanner to bellow at him at the end.
Yeah,
it's
and
like,
occasionally have his voice.
Jesus Christ, man. Yeah, just the laziness of him. It's just astonishing.
That's the thing. I think there's no. I mean, the note I wrote here is the story setup isn't bad, but why should I care? Was it a note that I've written down? It's like there's no
Matt. Literally, the note I've got is no tension, little sense of why we should care.
That's from your doctor, though, isn't it?
And then the other note is you're weird, Turlough, which is the one perceptive line in the entire script.
Just one thought that I wrote here, sort of slightly out of desperation, but I wrote, how do you think all the characters look back on this story?
The characters
involved. So imagine
you're
Tegan. What's your memory of this story?
Well, something I forgot to say at the beginning of this is whether this story had a bad rep, and it doesn't. It just doesn't have a rep.
It has no rep
totally
at all.
Forgotten about.
Yeah,
I imagine
it's almost like a missing episode.
If it vanished from the vaults, I don't think people would notice for some time, would they?
No.
If every DVD copy vanished.
No, that's absolutely right. It's not. I mean, there's stuff around this as well that really plumbs the depths.
It doesn't really have any defenders. And for the characters, I think Tegan would. Yeah, it was probably like many adventures she's had that we've not seen when they just turn up and wait around while the Doctor does something else.
Yeah,
I dread to think what happened to Nyssa on that ship. When she's promised, she's just
she doesn't even left there with a change of clothes.
Yeah, naively just promised to hang around there. The Garm, Lord knows, he looks very pleased to have his control box destroyed, but he's just going to be stuck on the same ship.
Now. Big dog thing.
But this is it. Let's try and say something positive about it. I do... John's wincing at me. I've used this word medieval a lot, and the thing is, I've mentioned Alien already. Do you know the original setup of the third Alien film when Vincent Ward was going to direct
when it was meant to be like a wooden planet full of monks? A wooden planet full of monks,
and that got... I think the studios lost their nerve, and it got downplayed to end up with a prison planet of...
with Charles Dance.
With Charles Dance. But that always sounded like an interesting idea, and there's lots of storyboards available that you can get online. Like we said, the setup for this I think is potentially good in that you could have had a medieval setting in the Black Death and that kind of view of the world where death was imminent all the time, but done it in a space setting. You would have had to have had an exceptional production team though, and I think not wanting to talk too much about Warrior's Gate, but Chris Bidmead script editing that was obviously someone who was on board with what Gallagher wanted to do.
He has a sensitivity for ideas. I think.
But even with that, Warrior's Gate's low on incident, but it's all about spending 4 episodes with exposition, and you gradually, the viewers, get to know more and more about this strange world they're in. That's not happening here, though. You needed much better production design, script editing.
Well, no, because almost that's the thing. Almost every bit of world building that you can do as a viewer for this is something that you very much have to do on your own terms. You sort of have to figure out yourself how the Garm might work. I mean, even with the Big Bang angle. I mean, that seems to be... I mean, that's potential. Yeah, I mean, it's an afterthought, but also a huge one. That like this is a story that kind of is dealing ostensibly with the creation of the universe. And I know it's an ongoing joke that there's about 5 or 6 different explanations for the Big Bang served over the years within Doctor Who. But you know, it's sort of just like, well, that's a thing that happened.
And I'm sorry as well. There's this whole thing about, oh my god, this, you know, shock revelation. It should be a big piece of drama. It doesn't have to signify anything or be symbolic of anything, but it should be just in story terms a big piece of drama. Oh my god, this is how the universe was created, and it's how the universe could be undone. Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. Can we find someone big enough to turn the lever to stop it?
Yeah,
because they literally just need someone strong enough to turn a switch off.
Yeah,
it's fucking ridiculous.
Which he does, a big red lever.
Yeah, it's just like,
because I like the fact that there's the scene that Davison literally just has a metal pipe that he's trying to do, and it's become a bit bent, so they have to get the big dog thing.
That didn't work.
Oh right, okay, we're
gonna need a bigger piece.
And he shuffles in, and looks very pleased when his box is destroyed. He just sort of stares off.
But no one, as you said, Jim, no one's really explained why that box is important.
Yeah, and also the death of the universe is 2 people looking a bit panicky. It doesn't mean anything.
And a rotting space pilot.
So, which just suggests something better, which isn't there at all. It's,
the thing is, I'm you know, it's wannabe dark, and that whole sort of alien thing really resonates as a thing that was sort of being aimed for.
There are a few kinds of drama that I find less bearable than wannabe dark.
No, and I completely agree. And the thing is, all right, I know it's well worn. Whatever happened between, whether it was just not a great script to begin with. Sayward, he went through the Sayward sausage machine.
It's Saturday night. Welcome to Sayward sausage machine.
I wish we'd called this podcast that.
You know, it's arrived as it has. At the very least, you know, as Jim was sort of saying, really, but you know, the production design, or at very least, the director could have tried to get a bit of tension out of it by shadowy figures and things, you know, suppression of things that are later revealed, and you know, hooded figures or something.
If someone somewhere with any kind of involvement in this had just tried to move the dial a tiny bit,
but no. And then, like you said, it's so. How can you be so wannabe dark with everything so brightly lit? It's so crazy. The other thing I wanted to pick up on, and this is really just a tiny production thing, but. There seems to be a bit where it shifts between tape and film, or something.
So what's happened is they've obviously shot.
It's really jarring.
Under the floorboards.
I mean that happens. That happens so much that obviously location stuff all shot on film, and
so the Tegan and Turlough stuff, they found a location.
Yeah,
for that.
and to be honest, that's like it has.
Sometimes they film it in another studio and use that to make it look a little more. You know, I think it's like if we go to something like Planet of the Evil. That's done in a studio, but they put it on film to make it look like a
Yes.
location. So I think there's...
But the thing is, I always feel that if I find it to a modern eye, it is always jarring if that happens.
Because that idea, it's sort of
But
almost...
it's less jarring if the exterior's in film and the interior's in tape.
Yeah.
It's very jarring when it's meant to be the same place as what's happening above the floorboards, and so it just.
I mean, to be honest, I think it's jarring. Full stop. I can understand why they do it, because of the portability of video cameras at the time. If you're going to go and shoot on location, you're going to have to go and shoot it on 16mm. I mean, I find it jarring, but you sort of you do reach an accommodation with it as a viewer that, like, okay, they're outside, it looks like this. They've gone indoors now, so it looks like this.
Yeah, exactly. But this is not
this, where obviously for whatever reason they decided to shoot the ventilation shaft scenes in an actual ventilation shaft somewhere.
Yeah, I think background on it is
although
Mary
those scenes
Rich
look far more atmospheric than anything else in the show. I mean, it's like,
although all it is two people.
All it is just two
people crouching along.
doing a bad
through a
version
dust.
of the
So
human
dull.
centipede. Really,
I mean, it's
aren't
really,
they?
it is really. I mean, Terminus is just really boring. You wanted Jim to find something good in it, and I do have a degree of praise.
Quantum of Solace from John.
Yeah. For the performance of the wistful guard Boar by
yes.
Peter Benson,
Yeah.
who ended up who did actually had quite a long gig in Heartbeat, it turns out. But I thought he was rather, the sort of philosophical, in a way, sort of philosophical guard.
He's
Well,
the
he
one
seems
thing
like
approaching a character.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a personality there, and that personality is possibly from the fact he's losing his nuts, isn't it? Well, sorry,
He's
Losing
like,
his mind.
he's losing his mind. Yes,
It's
and
the one
subsequently
thing,
his nuts.
Yeah.
It's the one thing that's quite. It's the one thing in the script that's both quite clever and quite moving is that twice he says it's your short-term memory that goes first.
Yeah.
as if he's
Always
forgotten
the
the
first to
fact
go,
that
yeah.
he's forgotten the fact that he said that already.
It's a weird mix of, like, there's a tiny bit of writing there, and then matched with a performer who's got to read on the material.
Yeah, but I mean, you really, Jim nailed it. It's a quantum of solace. It's,
Okay, so by contrast, because I'm just conscious we probably need to wrap up on Terminus, so perhaps
I wish some of the directors.
Well, yeah.
Yes.
Someone who we've only mentioned in passing, but for whom this is obviously a significant story, is Nyssa. Where I kind of think, so obviously she stays behind on Terminus to do aid work, essentially, with the
Synthesizing enzymes.
synthesizing enzymes for the lasers. And I wrote down for that, her moment of realization about what's going on and the potential role she could play in it seems just to arrive, comes out of nowhere. It's not really baked into anything we know about the character. But then I thought, she's so poorly defined as a character anyway. It's sort of like, yeah, okay, she's just decided to jump off at that point more than anything else. It's like, what do we make of her departure scene?
I was glad to see the back of her at the time.
Because it has been praised, that moment, elsewhere. Like, was it the doctor says, you're one of the bravest people I know, or something?
No, it just seems like a fairly regular, I'm not coming with you, Doctor, which is a fairly obvious, these people need me type of...
it's the equivalent of the cab arriving in Albert Square, really, isn't it?
Yes.
Driven by the Garm. where to, Gov? No, I mean, it's just extraordinary
She just
that
gets
they...
a polite handshake, really, doesn't she? That's like...
Oh, no, I think she does actually kiss the Doctor. There's a peck on the cheek,
yes, of
whereas
course.
when Tegan leaves in Resurrection, it's a polite handshake. And
That's
I think
it.
because I think people see a bit more of a relationship between the two of them, or shipping, as I think it's known in in fan circles. But yeah, you've got rid of Nyssa, but thank God you've got Turlo on board. Someone who's really going places.
Points to an exciting future for the series.
Two quick things to wrap up. The space disco pirate who isn't Liza Goddard.
Orville.
Yeah, the worst actor I think I've ever sin in my entire life. And the episode 1 cliffhanger, we're all going to die. I mean, words fail really. And the fact that it is a cliffhanger and therefore you have to see it twice, just the mind boggles. The second thing, which I feel like is a bit of an elephant in the room really, but we haven't really discussed Peter Davison and the Doctor in this. Apart from his twisting a pole.
I think that
on a
tells us
lever.
something. I think he does good work, but there's nothing there to get your teeth into. Like I say, I think most of this is exposition, isn't it? It's the character slowly finding out about the world, but it's not done with any oomph to it.
And nothing happens.
Yeah, I just find that,
the idea that they're all actually being exploited by this company we never see should be quite a big thing. And you can imagine someone like Robert Holmes in the 70s would have got a really good 4-parter out of this, about something where looks like the people who are holding the strings are actually just victims themselves, and they're all going to go off and do their own thing.
Yeah.
But this just...
So am I right in thinking that at this point, Liza Goddard had divorced Colin Baker, but was now married to Alvin Stardust?
Or Michael Grade, I think. Not married, but I think there was some link between them, isn't there?
I thought it was Alvin Stardust at this point.
She certainly was married to Alvin Stardust, but...
well, there you go. That was my takeaway from this.
If he'd been in this, that could, as the Garm, maybe, or Orville, that could have been... What was his name?
She married Alvin Stardust in 1981.
Can I just... Because what is this, episode 9? Have you enjoyed any of the Davisons we've reviewed so far, John?
No.
Okay.
and actually, I'm not sure I really like Davison.
His performance or that era? Or both?
Essentially both. I don't think he really has a character as the Doctor. He's just sort of this guy in a jacket with some celery, and he's kind of nice. He's like head boy, basically. I don't really see... It doesn't touch the sides for me. There's no depth or side to him. He's just nice, and that's fine, and he's quite charming, but I don't really see it.
Here we go.
No, we'll just pause for this moment.
As written, I mean, when I was working on this, the only guide I had to go off was the costuming that you'd had for the previous season.
Yeah.
So the scene was written that at that point you would rip off the brooch and say, I can't breathe. The brooch would fall to the floor, and the brooch would then become the clue that the Doctor follows.
right.
And you would prick your thumb on the brooch, which is very kind of, fairy tale and everything else.
Yes, well, that works.
And there would be a series of blood drops that the Doctor would then know which direction you'd gone in. In the meantime, of course, in came the Crumpet costumes.
Yes.
And I had no idea about that. And the first thing I knew about it was when the scripts came back to me in their typed-up studio production form. And it was Nissa drops a skirt, and the line that you'd been given at that point, which you can thank me for arguing for it now, but the line was, "Oh, my stomach feels so distended."
Oh, thank you so much for changing that. Thank you.
Okay, and so then for our final story tonight, we're all the way up to 2009 and the waters of Mars. So this is the penultimate David Tennant adventure, if not episode. It's the penultimate Russell T Davies script for the series and part of his tenure as showrunner. And also, it's sort of... I'd kind of forgotten, actually, until after because I rewatched this again last night, and I'd not watched it since it went out. It was sort of the Halloween special for 2009, wasn't it? Because you had this year of where there wasn't a regular series, just some sort of extended specials. And you had Planet of the Dead, which went out at Easter. This went out at Halloween. And then the Regeneration episodes went out at Christmas and New Year. So it's a story that I think, I don't think this constitutes a spoiler. It's sort of starting the process of dismantling and packing up the David Tennant and the RTD sort of period. You've got the 10th Doctor travelling solo, arrives on the planet Mars. Visits Bowie Base 1, which is the first Martian colony staffed by humans, where they're sort of attempting to grow some vegetation on Mars. But there's something nasty lurking in the water, and it all starts to go a bit wrong.
I suppose what we should also mention is, for us, this is the near future, but for the Doctor, it's an established chunk of history.
Yeah, so actually this is where, and I think we touched on this last time when we were discussing the Aztecs, this is where the notion of the fixed point in time really sort of comes to bear on the narrative for the first time. So the Doctor is aware that there is an impending disaster on this base, but because it's a fixed point in time, because it can't change... He is powerless to do anything about that. He just has to stand back and observe events until he basically decides that he will intervene, and then the rest of the story sort of sees the consequences of that play out. So I think there's a lot of sort of thematic stuff and detail to get into on this one, and a lot that's very interesting about it. But just as a broad brush starting point, did you guys enjoy this?
As a broad brush thing, I just want to say I loved the robot.
Before we recorded, I said to
I'll
John,
explain later. We'll always give you a very different take on Doctor Who. You won't have heard any other podcast mention that about this story.
Oh my God. No, I said I've no idea what you think of this, John, except I suspect you like the robot.
Yeah, and I did. I really liked the robot. I really liked the robot. I
Just
liked
the
comic really
gadget
well.
element, or is it when he leaves the flaming trails, when he's moving at 30 miles an hour?
Back to the Future style flaming trail. To be serious for a moment, I really did like the robot. I think it's ever so cute, and it's an effective piece of comic relief.
Better than Nissa?
It's the thing with Russell T Davies, and actually this was co-written with Phil Ford, but the thing I would say about this is that, on a serious point about the robot, the fact that you can have a piece of writing and a story with so much serious stuff in it and so much depth, and yet Russell T Davies and Phil Ford are able to work in a really good piece of comic relief in that, just shows the skill at work. I mean, we were just discussing Terminus, where nothing happens at length for 4 episodes.
Nothing joins together.
Whereas this is
We'd
very
forgotten their comedy robot, in fact.
Yeah. Cleaning
indeed,
thing.
yes. Which, but with everything that's wrong with Terminus is done right here. And we were talking about Tomb at the top of the show. The Doctor arrives. There's a base, there's a problem, they get picked off one by one. Structurally, it's
largely the same setup, isn't it?
Yeah. And structurally, it's absolutely nailed on, and therefore, the writer wanting to explore some themes about the Doctor's post-traumatic stress, his loneliness, his mania, his hubris, and the fact that power corrupts, and even with the right intentions you can do things that are disastrously wrong with power if you've had it too long. They can explore all of that because it's just everything in structural terms is nailed down.
Well, in fact, it's the sort of bait and switch, really, which is so brilliant. And actually what this gets right that sort of Tomb doesn't get right is that it is a very, very familiar setup. It's the base under siege, essentially. But because of your familiarity with the structure, it takes you to some very unfamiliar places with the story and the subtext. And so that's the thing. It's like it sets up your expectations that it's going to be one thing, and actually it's another. And that sort of probably, I guess, the substance of what we're going to end up discussing on this. But I would preempt this and say, I find it quite interesting that this sort of almost falls through the cracks, this story. It's weird that there are a lot of kind of classics of the Davis era that are sort of talked about and held in very high regard now. But I think, because this came as part of the year of specials, which I think, people weren't terribly into at the time, and is perhaps overshadowed by the Regeneration episode a few months later, and then, of course, the start of the Matt Smith era and the Moffat era. It's kind of weirdly not massively discussed, this now, or perhaps has slightly slipped through the cracks. I think this is outstanding, and I think one of the greatest Doctor Who stories ever told. I think this is amazing.
Totally agree. I totally agree. I mean, this for me is, I love the Russell T Davies era, but that final segment of it, Series 4 and the specials, not the Michelle Ryan one, but
the proper
this,
ones.
But this and End of Time, I think he just nails everything about it. Is just all the ducks are in a row.
I think I'd forgotten how much I remember liking this at the time, and actually I've not seen The End of Time since it went out, and I remember sort of having fairly mixed feelings about that as it went out.
But this is exceptional.
But this is absolutely outstanding.
Yeah, I mean, I remember being underwhelmed by it when it went out, but there was a general sense of the series fatigue by this point. Russell T Davies had been there for enough years, even though I think it did have a boost at the end of Series 4, but this felt like... I think because I knew there were going to be a couple of specials, they were going to be specials, and i.e. dealing with big barnstorming issues. Whereas, as we say, this is good, but it's doing a traditional story very well, and then does something extraordinary at the end.
Yes.
Watching it now, and I've got to say, it's not something I've revisited much in the last
I've not
7
seen
years, 6 years, whatever it is.
Went out.
The first thing I want to say is the zombies look really good.
Yeah.
Again, I remember not being that impressed by them and thinking, this is... I think possibly part of it, was you always got those kind of Doctor Who confidential making of, and you just think, oh my God, there's going to be half an hour of people with hose pipes up their arms. Just watching it on their own, there's something I can't quite put my finger on about what's off about them. It's really quite disturbing.
Just the water coming out,
endless water coming out of the mouth, and the cracks
sleeves
around
as
the
well.
mouth.
Weirdly, it's the sleeves. It's the long shots where it's like there's just water pouring out of their hands, or
and
something.
the cracks around the mouth.
And it's not like they kill people
I don't think
in
I've
an
seen
unusual
that.
way.
It's
but
not
there's
like
just
it's
something quite it doesn't sit well with me.
But it's also the acting. They're clearly told to look slightly
askance, and
and dead behind the eyes, and sort of hungry.
And this is at the point as well where you're seeing zombies in everything. You know, your post sort of Shaun of the Dead, Dawn of the Dead remake, I think 28 days later, and you're now on to kind of Walking Dead territory. So the idea, zombies are everywhere at this point in the culture. But there's something here. I mean, I think it is just the water thing. And the fact that their mouths look so dry and cracked because they've had water running over them.
It's so strange. I mean, the thing is,
I've not seen that idea anywhere else.
We would often say, "Oh, this is a great costume. It's a great monster, spooky for the kids. It's quite fun."
Yeah, we've done the Garm.
Watching this again, I genuinely found it unsettling. Each time
really
you
put the
looked
shit on me.
It's creepy. This is creepy, and it's also, I mean, and that's the design aspects of it. I think are really good, and the base too, and everything. The other thing is, it's in that vein. It's really brutal.
Oh, this is unbelievably brutal.
The bit where Steffi is trapped and the water's coming towards her.
She's watching the kids,
and then the last thing she does is watch the video from her kid. She puts it on, knowing that she's going to die, and
then you see her sort of fitting essentially as they start to sort of transform. It's a really violent, quick transformation.
Typically in Doctor Who, if someone's facing death, they will say, "Save yourself, Doctor," or something. They'll face death. She doesn't want to die. She's absolutely terrified and
but the other thing with this
devastating
was it works very well, especially whatever we've said about Tomb of the Cybermen. This is doing a base under siege with everything nailed down, just really locked down. The thing for me this time was knowing what it is. As soon as the Doctor realizes, oh god, this is something I should stay here and stop this happening, but I can't, But that whole thing just adds something else to it, which is missing from other Doctor Who stories.
Well, because
and the fact, if he did bugger off, we would think less of him as the Doctor, but also, he can't stay and screw around with things. Yeah. And then unexpectedly he does. Yeah.
That's the thing. It's like it's such an amazing inversion of what you would normally get from Doctor Who, in that, his initial instinct, rather than stay and explore and celebrate and all this kind of thing, as soon as he clocks the situation, it's his immediate desire to get out.
Although he still lingers a lot.
He still lingers because he can't quite bring himself, but he knows he has to leave. And then when actually he decides to sort of punch through and become heroic and save the day as he would normally...
Heroic/arrogant.
Heroic/arrogant. That's the thing. Yeah. But it's all of it thrown through a very cynical prism, because when he starts behaving like the Doctor by saving people, he behaves very unlike the Doctor by being, frankly, a hubristic dick about it. And then the consequences of that are appalling as well. I mean, it's an amazing sort of inversion of, he spends the entire episode doing the opposite to what his instinct is, and then when he gives into his instinct, the outcome is really bleak and disastrous.
Yeah, because he's not even like, hey, I've saved you, thank goodness. He's very much waiting for a round of applause, isn't he?
Well, I think, obviously there's arrogance and hubris here, but actually I think that he's profoundly ill. He's a very ill man. The Doctor is very ill, psychologically tormented. He's pulled apart. He's unhinged. He's completely off. And it's, Tennant delivers that unbelievably.
Those final scenes are something else. That's the absolute career high for Tennant, I think.
Absolutely. And what I love about those scenes right at the end is, they're still writing the sort of light-hearted lines that Tennant's Doctor would say,
but he spits them.
Yeah, and it's just it's scary, because you think, oh my god, there's no one home. It's just that there's something. He's totally unhinged, and it's you really feel it. Lindsay Duncan, of course, is an actor of serious pedigree and delivers a top rate performance.
She's
as well.
Amazing.
But then the writing for it as well. Yeah. When she's talking about, he asks her whether she has any regrets, and there's this real poetry about what it's like to be in space, and to be on Mars, where the only straight line is the sunset.
Yeah.
Or the sunlight. It's just, wow. It's just,
because that's the thing.
Dialogue
I think Davis occasionally, I think quite often, he has a tendency to write very lyrical, poetic speeches for people. And his sort of two modes are, he's very good at sort of capturing the rhythm and nuance of everyday sort of quote-unquote ordinary speech. And then he can also write beautiful speeches. And I think sometimes where you've seen guest actors, and sometimes the regular cast in Davis-era Doctor Who come unstuck, is where they can deliver the sort of ordinary chit-chat, but they can't do the speeches. And so then when you get someone of Lindsay Duncan's caliber, so, those moments...
She doesn't oversell it.
She doesn't oversell it. And I mean, even compared to someone who is very, very good, like Billie Piper, she occasionally falls foul of like, it's so wonderful looking at the sunset, all that kind of stuff that can sometimes grate in retrospect. Whereas Lindsay, she's just amazing in this and is such an amazing foil for the Doctor as well.
No, I think it's a very well written character, and given that the Doctor's travelling solo for these specials, so David Morris is kind of an ersatz companion a few stories earlier, Michelle Ryan obviously in Planet of the Dead. Here, I don't get the sense she's an ersatz companion.
No.
It's kind of her show and the Doctor happens to turn up in it almost a few times. There's a lot of times the Doctor's off doing his own thing.
Well, it's
and
her
there are scenes
life,
with her
and he
leading
comes
things,
and fucks around with it, essentially.
Yeah,
I mean, that's very much the sense, even at the end when she's sort of accepted what her destiny is. She's really angry that the Doctor has sort of come in and messed around with her life. I mean, she's furious with him.
Well, there's a sexism, misogyny thing as well there. Like, he's the man who's going to come and save, and she's the independent woman who has the right to her own life and actually her own death as well. I think that we've talked already about the hubris, the arrogance, the mental instability of the Doctor, and the sort of idea that power corrupts, and even people with the right intentions can make the wrong decisions if they're blinded by the power they have. But actually, the most important takeaway for me is a lot of art is about the meaning of life. This is about the meaning of death.
Yeah,
and her death,
because the impetus in Doctor Who is quite often just to prevent death.
Yes. And actually, her death is part of a process of renewal and reassessment by her descendants.
Yeah, we've not really mentioned that yet. It's not just that it's a fixed point that she dies, but that inspires key moments that sort of there's a whole chain of events leading on, which. Again, it was something I took a bit too much, paid a bit too much attention to first time. Of why do the Doctor save these people then and then dump them back on Earth in their present day rather than just taking them somewhere else? Of course, this isn't important. It's more the fact that he did that rather than the outcome of it.
Well, and also he sort of does it like a magic trick, because they're all setting up as they prepare the rocket to sort of leave, and they're saying it's going to be 9 months' journey back home. And he sort of says, "Oh well, no, this is the day I brought you back. It's the same day as the one where you are. Look, here's your house." And sort of is almost kind of he's totally showboating at this point, and that's what disturbs him. I mean, the scene, I'm terribly sorry, but I've forgotten the character's name. But the other girl that he saves, Mia, who he saves. The fact that her response is just to be terrified and to run off is fantastic.
What does she say? What are you?
Yeah, who are you?
Yeah.
Who the hell are you?
Yeah.
That's the thing. And actually, because there's consistently a lot of people calling the Doctor on his bullshit in this as well. Because I mean, the other bit is when that amazing sequence where he's in the airlock in the spacesuit and he's talking to Adelaide, the Lindsay Duncan character, over the intercom. And he's basically saying, you've got to let me out. This has got to happen. And then as she releases the airlock, she just goes, "Damn you," and like lets him go or something, which is just
a bit Lord Melchett.
Yeah, a little bit. But it's like, well, no, and I can't deliver it with the same caliber that she does. But just "Damn you," and just lets him go or something. And it's
and the line. I think a couple of lines before that. He says, "You die today." Who the fuck does he think he is? You die today. It's just, like, why does he... And like, he shouldn't tell her anything. He shouldn't even really tell her that...
Well, he does get pressed into it. And again, obviously, there's the mechanics of storytelling. I mean, that has to be in there. It's... No,
of course it does, but he shouldn't.
Yeah.
And when she says, "Why are you telling me this?" and he says, "As consolation." It's chilling as fuck.
And but also, looking back, it's amazing they get away with that and the suicide at the end.
Yeah.
Given this is a big family show and everything.
Yeah.
But it's almost that it's because he keeps saying, at every point when the gloves are off, and he basically says to her, you're going to die today, and this has to happen. There's a sense, and it's not just that the Doctor immediately turns into a shit for this episode. There's a sense still that he's kind of grappling with this, and this is what comes over so amazingly in the writing and in Tennant's performance, in that he sort of keeps constantly saying, "But remember your family, remember your grandchildren." He's sort of trying to say, look, he is apologising for it and trying to make it up to her, but at the same time acting in such a sort of high-handed.
Yeah, in fact, even though it's only been a few days since I've watched it, doesn't he give her the whole future history before eventually coming back to, but in order for that to happen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's something as well. It's, in some ways he does, and I think we touched on this when we were talking about the Aztecs last month, that there's a sense that, you know, things happen and then time roots around it, but it basically, so it's broadly the same outcome. But one thing I like, one of the devices that I thought was really effective, if unsubtle but very good, was the sort of the screenshots of the BBC News homepage is, just to sort of establish what's happening, and you see that change.
Visual storytelling.
Very good.
A little bit overplayed. That they had to do for all of them.
But did you notice that it's sort of when they talk about Adelaide's family on the initial timeline, it's the screenshot's all about, you know, she died on Mars, no one knows why, but she died a hero, etc., etc., etc. But then that sort of broadly is what happens after she dies on Earth but commits suicide. It's very much like,
yeah, go on.
I can't remember the exact wording of it, but it's like it's something about how, you know, her honour has been restored by her family or something like that. The tone very much changes. That the screen, you only briefly see it, but the story then becomes, you know, her death is a mystery because she died on Earth and no one understands how or why. And that there's something a bit off and weird about that. But her actions, it's almost like, you know, the family reputation is restored by the...
That must have been bloody weird that these are people meant to be on Mars, but then one of them turns up dead at home, and then another couple do as well. But
the conspiracy theorists sort of had a field day with that.
Oh my God,
looking at
jet fuel melting steel beams.
One of the sub-headlines is the enigma of the Doctor, as if he is a kind of known figure in the news or something.
Yeah, which is sort of, so even then, I mean, it's like the time reroutes itself, but the Doctor's kind of had his influence in that he does take a little bit of the shine off what he presents as initially a fairly heroic story.
We already mentioned the robot, but I just wanted to sort of come back a little bit because I just think, you know, with all this serious stuff that we talked about, and yet there's still quite a lot of really good gags. Obviously, we mentioned the robot, but, you know, that initial bit where he goes into the base and she said, and Adelaide says name, rank, and intention, and he just says Doctor, fun.
And when someone really then says, "Are you one of the Branson inheritance lot?"
Yeah,
which was such a good line.
There are other good lines. It's not actually a funny one, but there are just little bits that little Russell T Davies flourishes, like about the you know, on Earth there had been the oil apocalypse. Just loving it's like, that's like when he writes things like about the nightmare child and the could have been king and all that sort of stuff. He just those little
throws in the little idea
that just create
just fill out a background that we're never gonna. We don't need to see.
It creates a universe. You don't need to know more about it, and it's quite nice that it's enigmatic. But you get it gives you an idea that there's a fleshed out universe. It's so clever. It's amazing.
It's sort of interesting as well, though. I mean, we've talked about where this comes in the kind of 10th Doctor's story arc, but maybe sort of it's worth thinking a bit about where this comes in the sort of Davis story arc, because I've been thinking a little bit about, because obviously we've got some distance on his time as like sort of lead writer and executive producer of Doctor Who, sort of how that whole era works and how it all fits together. The only reason I was thinking about this, in part, is because there was, from where we're standing now, there was an interview with Russell T Davies in The Guardian earlier this week where he was talking about, I'm not sure if it'll have gone out by the time we put this out, but his adaptation of Midsummer Night's Dream that he's doing for BBC One. And the article...
That's Shakespeare.
That's
yes.
Eric Sayward. I think did the original.
Yeah, well, you know, he's got good pedigree in reviving the classics. But the article talks about how, compared to his very sort of Tiggerish public persona around the Doctor Who years now, he's sort of, you know, he's a much quieter figure now, and obviously he's had a lot of sort of personal stuff to deal with since Doctor Who. But there's something about the writing, I think, like towards the very end of his era, he starts to sort of very consciously, I think, dismantle his own ideas in a way that there's a real sort of sense of sadness to it, but there's also a sense of, like, he comes out the gate and presents so much optimism in his view of the future and humanity and the Doctor and what all these things can be. But by the end of his run, there's a sadness and a cynicism there that it's almost like, my slight take on the sort of Davis era is that he in terms of all the big ideas that he wants to set in motion for the series, he does all of that in Series 1. Series 2 and 3, he's kind of just keeping the plate spinning, kind of keeping the ball in the air, although obviously does some great stuff. But then by Series 4 and into the specials, he starts throwing in things like Midnight and Turn Left and Waters of Mars and huge swathes of the End of Time, which present a much less rosy, much less optimistic output. It's almost just like, I don't know, there's something very sad about his arc in that as well. Sad in a good way, but very sad about how, you know, he can't sustain this worldview, which is clearly so much at the centre of what he wants to put out in the world with the Christopher Eccleston series.
Yeah, but I think that's magnificent that he does. I think it's. I don't know if you were suggesting there RTD himself couldn't maintain it, or whether it was a conscious decision to say things don't end well.
I think it's both.
You peak and then you go down the other side. And I think to wind up saying, yeah, you have an imperial phase in your life, and then inevitably, you know, your life isn't going to end that well. And I think because he's had. At that point, the show's so successful, and he's clearly validated, you know, his position as writer and the Doctor as a character. You can do that, and I'm so happy he did that. He actually came with some really grim stuff towards the end. Those are the episodes you mentioned. I think are some of the best ones.
Absolutely.
You know? Oh yeah.
No, it's totally top tier. But it's like it's just that bravery to dismantle. I mean, because he. You know, it's such a clearly defined worldview in the Eccleston series of like what he wants the stories to say and what he wants the series to be. Then 4 years later, for him to be, you know, so sort of successfully but cynically dismantling all of that and actually saying no, this doesn't stand anymore is incredible.
And I really want to praise as well the direction. I think Graham Harper does a lovely job with this. It really skips along at a pace.
Is it Graham Harper? I didn't plot that.
Yeah.
That's interesting because I thought most of his new series work is fairly pedestrian. I think
it's fairly homogenised. I don't honestly think the directors stand out too much these days, but. So
yeah, I mean, I think this is an incredible way to start. I mean, to start the process. I mean, had he regenerated at the end of this, I'd have been satisfied and said, I thought this was one of the best Doctor send-offs you could have had. I mean, the other thing, sorry, just I guess the final point worth making is just what do you make of that final appearance of the Ood in the snow?
Okay.
Right.
It's an odd thing because they're introduced as a very different type of thing, but I think they do assume the mantle of mysterious kind of portents of doom and whatever. Yeah, quite well.
I think it's such a beautiful moment where it just appears and doesn't say anything, but it's like, it's a good ending.
Gorgeous. It's a cliffhanger of saying, you know, pretty much. I don't know what his actual words are, but they're pretty much, you know, I think your time's up now.
Well, in Planet of the Ood, which is in Series 4.
Yeah.
I mean, I
think your song is coming to an end.
Yeah.
They've sort of set the ball rolling, really.
They have, and they're not just soothsayers. It's also meant to be sort of comforting. It's like a sort of psychological Macmillan's nurse. Role fulfilled.
Yeah, absolutely. They're there to like sort of gently wind him down. So.
Yeah, and I think it's very beautiful. And actually, although
just as a visual as well.
Well, not just as a visual, but also as you know, I was going to say that I've not always liked his work, but I think Murray Gold does a blinding job on Waters of Mars, and that that stuff is just beautiful.
I think this is absolutely, you know, top tier, all-time Doctor Who classic. I think this is absolutely stunning.
Yeah.
Next to Terminus, easily the best story we've done this week.
No, top draw.
I had such a problem with dandruff. Well, if you never had it, you just don't understand what a problem it is. It's so embarrassing. And I tried loads of things, went through everything. Finally, I thought, I'll try a new hairdresser. So I walked in there and he said, well, you've got dandruff, haven't you? Oh, great news. But he recommended Head and Shoulders. So I tried it, worked. Absolutely no problems since, and it looks really great.
Most people find Head and Shoulders clears dandruff ordinary dandruff shampoos leave behind. Use it regularly.
Okay, thanks for downloading. Thanks especially to John for getting up so early to watch the shows.
He did it so you don't have to.
Yeah. Although you've also done the shows you've also watched the stories in time for the next show as well.
Yeah, it was a 7-hour marathon.
So do remember that next when you're listening to our March show, which is going to be bigger, better,
more tired.
Yeah. Until then, goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Gadget.
Fighting in the dance hall. Oh man, look at those cavemen go. It's the 'cause they're